I'm Pat McGibbon. I'm the CKO, Chief Knowledge Officer of AMT.
And I'm Harry Moser. I'm the founder and president of the Reshoring Initiative.
And today we're talking about the impact of automation and productivity on not just manufacturing, but the economy as a whole, with a focus on the manufacturing area. Now, Harry, to start this off, when we were prepping for this, we were talking about the differences in prices, the cost structures, and how products and components coming in from overseas can often be significantly less than what we produce them for in the United States.
As you can see in this slide, the Chinese price as a percentage of the U.S. price averages about 70%. So the U.S. price is about 1.4 times as high. So this is data from analysis of TCO users comparing when they compared China to U.S. prices. So we're 40% higher than China. That's why so much work has been offshored to China. To improve competitiveness, to convince companies to bring that back, we need to get our price down relative to their price. So we need it for competitiveness, to enable reshoring, to enable manufacturing to grow. In general, for the GDP, growth depends on productivity and workforce growth. Workforce growth is close to zero. Productivity is easier to achieve. It happens faster. And to have a higher standard of living requires higher productivity. So all of these things come down and say, we've got to do better on productivity.
Yeah, and when people think of productivity, they often think about automation. And that it's not always necessarily just automation that creates productivity. You've got a lot of other things. You got the capital you put into it. You've got the labor that is involved in producing it. And something's happened to our productivity engine over the course of the last 30 years. We used to have productivity in manufacturing actually lead productivity of the overall business economy. In this slide, for example, the blue bars are the productivity rates of growth over certain periods for all businesses, all non-farm businesses. The orange bar is the productivity growth rate for manufacturing as a sector separated from the rest. As you can see, through most of the times going back into the 50s into 2007, manufacturing led that charge. But something's happened over the course of the last 14 years to reverse that. And manufacturing productivity is actually just creeping along at a fraction of a percentage point. Any insights from you on that particular issue, Harry?
I think the biggest problems have been that the U.S., as we mentioned, is not price competitive. And since we're not price competitive, our factories have not been busy enough. They have not been at a high capacity utilization level. Therefore, they can't afford and they don't have to invest, so they don't invest enough, because you have to invest to get the higher productivity. So a combination of we're not price competitive and we're not busy enough. And the best way to solve both of those is to get us price competitive, bring more work back, like by reshoring, load the shops, and they'll invest. It'll be a wonderful IMTS 2022.
Yeah, well, it's investment for sure, but it's also making the right type of investments and knowing when to throw away a machine. We have a habit in this country of holding on to our equipment until they become antiques and can begin appearing in museums. I think right now we are 3 or 4 years behind, and so we're around 12 years, 11 and a half years on average age of equipment for manufacturing in the United States. And the numbers in China are like 8, and in Germany slightly higher than that, but still less than what there are here in the United States. So that's got to be, in your perspective, a competitive disadvantage.
Huge disadvantage. The newest equipment is the best, and it's a combination of the newest equipment with the most automation on it. One of the reasons that the U.S. invests less is that we have an unlevel playing field. Our costs are just so high relative to most offshore countries that our companies, when they try to invest, they can't get the ROI they need to justify the big investment. I ran into a very good forging shop in the U.S. He told me he looked at replacing everything in his shop and found out that the prices are so low for the forgings because of foreign competition that he can't justify the investment. So we need to level the playing field. The way to do that is a better skilled workforce. You absolutely have to have the better skilled workforce, a lower corporate tax rate, and immediate expensing, which we have now, but it's going to go away if we don't hang tough on it. A lower US dollar, 20-30% lower. The dollar is way overpriced. And ideally a value-added tax, which would give us the protection that most other countries have. So you do all those things, country will boom, capacity utilization will go up, work will come back, competitiveness will improve.
Well, I agree with you, particularly on the value-add tax. That does make a big shift in leveling the playing field, because their exports to this country, they get a rebate on that value-add tax, 20% or more, that none of our manufacturers get when they export to a foreign country. Actually, they still pay on the profits and revenues that they accumulate overseas. So with respect to increasing our utilization, and we need to work away at getting costs down. And we've talked a little bit about the workforce being as good as Germany's, and the equipment being as new. But we've got some other things we got to deal with. For example, we have to address how imports and exports are done, and look at some way of reshoring, not just the manufacturing, but the component process and the materials as well. Because if we want to be able to reduce our risk of supply chain failure, we've got to put a little bit more, or at least some, of our manufacturing capacity back into this country. We've talked about increasing the intelligence and skills of our workforce, increasing the workforce pool, about lowering the age of equipment through a variety of different methodologies, including longer term thinking, better tax programs, leveling the tax field across the world by us joining the value-added tax group. We've talked about the challenges of materials. As we look to reshore and change our policies and change our thinking, we've got a very tough road ahead of us as far as the competition that's being introduced, not just from our European counterparts, which we are somewhat on the same footing with, but primarily against the Asian tigers, China, Korea, and still Japan, as forces of being able to lower costs, increase productivity at a fairly significant rate. I think when we were talking just over the weekend, we were talking about China being at 5 and 6% year-over-year growth in productivity, which has led to this really, really significant gap between our real manufacturing output versus China's. We were the leader in the world right up until around 2010. And in 2011, they passed not only us, but passed Germany on the way to passing us. That's a pretty tough gap to fill. How long, and what do you think the critical things we need to do to make it happen?
Well, basically, the things that you've described: the absolutely skilled workforce, quantity and quality, corporate tax rates, immediate expensing, get the dollar down 20-30%, value-added tax. You put those things together, U.S. manufacturing will boom. Investment will soar. Guidance counselors or students will realize that manufacturing careers are now the best careers once again, and we'll have the golden days of U.S. manufacturing once more.
So do you think we're on the right path now, with the exception of making some of those policy changes at the government federal level? Do you think we're on the right path, or where would you start first?
I think companies have realized that it's up to them to improve their skilled workforce. They can't sit around and wait for people to come to them. So right. They've got to do it themselves. And increasingly they're doing that. More apprentice programs, better training, et cetera. So they're starting from a very low level. We've got decades to go. It took us 40 or 50 years to get to where we are. It's going to take us decades to get back, but the time to start is now. The government understands that manufacturing has to be strengthened, but doesn't quite understand this pricing disadvantage as the key that has to be done. And you can't cut people's wages to get your prices down. So you have to do it by getting the dollar down, by having the people work smarter, by having companies buy smarter what they're gonna source either here or offshore. So things like that, the government needs a good industrial policy. Hasn't gotten one yet, is moving in that direction.
So me being the optimist, I'll touch on the things I think we're starting to do differently, and you correct me with where you think I get off track. First, the pandemic's been horrendous. Millions of people have died, but out of it has come a driving force to automate. There's been significant increase in amount of money spent by all sizes of shops. Automation used to be only for the big boys, and we're seeing it from the top all the way into the contract machining. So that's one of the positive things. And reshoring, we see people bringing their supply chains closer to home. Companies like Hardage, who's brought their entire production facility for a couple of their product lines back to North America. And we see in the USMTO numbers on taking a look at who's buying, we see the mold and die and tool industries spending multiples throughout into 2020 and beginning of 2021. They were spending 400% more on new capital equipment than they were even in 2019, which suggests that there's some kind of a rebuilding and expanding of the kind of work they're willing to do in that business. And it's not just been happening in those industries; it's been happening in a handful. But we are so far behind. I mean, you and I talked about the capital stock of machines in China and the United States being, again, multiples of what we have here. It's going to take a while.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your optimism. The question will be, is that surge of investment just now because you can't get the product in here from offshore, or when the supply chain gets settled down, you can get the boats into the port, et cetera, then will the companies be smart enough to source increasing amounts here instead of going back to their old ways of getting it from offshore? If the corporations do the math correctly, and if the government gives them a help with leveling the playing field, great opportunities.
Fantastic. Anything you want to add to the closings here?
Well, I believe, just to quantify what we've talked about, I believe that having a workforce like Germany's apprenticeship programs would reduce our manufacturing costs by 5 or 10%. Having equipment as new as Germany's run by that really good workforce, another 5 or 10%. So let's say there's at least 10% cost reduction we can achieve if we do it as smart as Germany does. 10% improvement in price would increase U.S. manufacturing by 1.5 million manufacturing workers. That's 12, 13%. Can you imagine all the companies out there, 12, 13% more volume? That's what we're looking at. Let's all get together and make it happen.
I'm in on it with you. And so until next time, when we get together for another fireside chat, take care and be careful.
Bye, everybody.